This is Rodrigo Arancibia from the High Tech High Graduate School of Education, and I'm here to talk to you about EdSpace, a social learning network. Well, what is EdSpace? EdSpace is a place for you to connect and get curious with the people that you want to connect with. But what EdSpace isn't is a popularity contest like Twitter. It's not a place for you to sit and listen and sit and get like YouTube. EdSpace TV is a personal channel for you to do your own vlogging to tell your story about your experiences. Not comfortable with video yet? It's all good. Every single channel is going to have post-it boards. Write your question down on the post-it board and someone will respond to you with a video post. Social media networks are noisy. That's why we created EdSpace filters. On every single channel, you'll be able to drill down on which educators you want to learn from and which educators you want to get curious with. Whether you're a second grade teacher in Arkansas or a project-based learning teacher in San Diego, use the EdSpace filters to find your people and get curious with them. EdSpace has two types of channels. Public channels that everybody can view and everybody can access, and private channels that only teachers from your school can see. Cool thing is, you can also see which teachers from your school site are signed up for EdSpace. So what's next? Introduce yourself. Pin a video to your personal channel and tell us what you're curious about. Tell us what you're working on. Tell us what you're passionate about. The most important thing is that you get started. Show up and share more.
To audience members, what were you doing when you were 17 years old? We have with us for the final speaker interview of Day 1, Future of Schools, here at Inspired Are You Future Ready, Miss Deborah Olatunji. Deborah will be sharing with us on the topic of why you should create your own access, based on one of the chapters from her book, Unleashing Your Innovative Genius, High School Redesign. Yes, Deborah is not just an author, she is also an education reform activist and Martin Luther King award-winning poet over in the United States. She has done a tremendous amount of work and will be sharing with you how networking as well as perspective are two important ingredients in creating your own access within the K-12 education system.
Hello, I am so excited and happy that you are here. My name is Deborah Olatunji, and I am one of the speakers for Day 1, the Future of Schools and the Inspired Conference. And before I turn into a tiny little square for sharing my screen, I wanted to start off big screen and to extend a very big thank you to the organizers for this event, for you for attending, of course, the attendees, because there was so much work and time put into this. I know that you're going to benefit a lot from it. There's a lot of wisdom and insights and action steps that you'll be able to take after each and every single webinar and each and every single day. And so that's how I wanted to kick off the session. My name is Deborah Olatunji, and I am now going to share my screen with you. So my session is titled, Why You Should Create Your Own Access. And in this webinar, I'm going to be talking about the theories behind it and the action steps in order to do what the title is saying. So before we dive into that, I do want to share a brief history about me so that we're more like friends rather than strangers. You know, with the world of Zoom, we're always navigating how to create new connections and build relationships, and I think sharing those details are really important. And so one thing I'm really excited to share with you is that before I used to introduce myself as a 17-year-old education activist from Delaware who is the author of the book, Unleashing Your Innovative Genius, High School Redesigned, the founder of a student-led organization called the Student Leadership Initiative Program that really specializes on peer mentorship and helping students have a platform where they can find their purpose and, explore experiential learning. But this past Friday, on the 14th, I turned 18. So now my introduction is entirely brand new by one word, and that is that I am an 18-year-old education activist from Delaware, and I'm so excited to share my story with you, as well as go into the heart of what it means to create access. This entire webinar is actually modeled off of Chapter 5 in my book, Unleashing Your Innovative Genius, High School Redesigned. And you'll hear in the interview where I talk about, some of the ways that you can continue to create your own access, but even more in this webinar, I'll give you the action steps that you need to really understand what that tagline even means and why I decided to make that the title for chapter 5. Some of the goals for this webinar are, like I said, understanding the theories and taking action steps towards the ideas that we talk about, developing real questions about what it means to create access and helping others create access as well, and also how to tackle this new school year. We all imagine that, well, for us in the United States, we're having virtual and hybrid versions of education, and it's different. It might be the same as last semester, it might not be the same, but as a whole, we are really getting to this point in education where we're having to take a moment to pause and really think about what is best for the students, what is best for learners like me, what is best for really equipping educators with the tools that they need to succeed on these virtual classrooms. And so that's something that we're going to try to tackle today. And then some of the tools that you'll need: a laptop, something to write with, a phone. You're gonna need a water bottle because you just gotta stay hydrated. That's a fact of life that I always live by. Stay hydrated. So keep a water bottle nearby you, and get ready to ask tons of questions. I'll have my email on the side of some of the slides, and also just be prepared to have lots of fun. All right. So here's a quick little overview of what we're going to be diving into. I'm more of a methodical person who follows like a more strategic form of my presentations. And so I like to break it down exactly into the different parts that I want to go into, as opposed to just winging it. And I am following a short little script, but for the most part, I'd like to stick to my overview so that you have a real idea of what this webinar is going to be about, and that your notes can be, sectioned in that way. And so these are the 3 things that we're really going to focus on. They're very action-oriented parts of the theory of creating your own access, which will really be helpful in terms of making those immediate action steps at the end of this webinar and being able to phrase questions that you can ask me later. So let's kick it off with personal value. One of the biggest things that I always tie into what it means to even have personal value to begin with is understanding your low moments. So that's the setbacks, the dilemmas, the milestones that are not really milestones, they're really just stones in your shoe that just, cause discomfort and make you feel like you're not in the right place. But it's really in those moments of discomfort where we find a lot of the growth. I was sharing with another group the other week or two about how it's important to understand why uncomfortable situations happen and then how to navigate them when they occur. And so one of the biggest things that I've been able to do is turn failure into fortitude. And that's actually one of the biggest points in my keynote speech. And that's not what this is, but in my keynote, I usually talk about how you can turn these difficult and tough situations that seem like the worst thing ever, and you can really make them turning points in your story. And so for me, in terms of my personal value, one of the biggest failures that I went through was something that a lot of students experience on a daily basis that they might even continue to experience in the fall, unless high schools decide to do pass-fail, which is a much more favorable grading system. But with grades in the way that I was educated, we had A's, we had B's, we had C's, we had D's, we had the 100-point system as well, where 90 to 100 was an A and 80 to 90 was a B and so forth. Well, 80 to 89 was a B and so forth. And so I had GPAs and whatnot and all these different numerical reasons to show my value. And so when I didn't meet the standard of maybe an A, which was like a 95 or in the 90s range, it would be seen as a failure. And especially when I was in the 10th grade, I failed a biology quiz, a pop quiz, and it actually catapulted my entire journey into education reform, because I realized my value cannot be tied to this number, because if it's tied to this number, then what does education mean after this class? What does education mean after this semester, after I graduate high school, which I just did in July? What does it mean when I go on to the actual real world where people aren't assigning numbers to me and making me feel like I'm only in this box of a singular experience? And so understanding that was really important for me, because I started to realize that these failures that are academic for me, and even sometimes failures that are not academic, they're things that don't define you, but rather they are pieces of your story that you can use to ultimately create something really beautiful. One of those things is in creating a positive light, because if you see yourself in a positive way, despite the failure, despite what that failure might represent, it represents to other people. So they see that, they see, she has a persevering mindset, she has grit, and that's really the fortitude idea when you go from failure to fortitude, and she's someone who's not going to sit in her failure. And that's kind of the personal value characteristics that we're also ultimately trying to help students develop, especially during this challenging time in a pandemic. It also means using I am statements to communicate your needs, or I am statements to just simply be empowering. I did a similar session like this in May, and one of the students, he shared a really insightful I am statement that I still think about every single day. And he said, I am nemesis. And I had him break it down for the entire group because to me, it clicked. I immediately understood what he meant. But I felt like if he gave more language to what he was saying, it would really help the group in understanding the importance of using the word nemesis as opposed to a different one. And so when he explained that, he eventually conveyed that I am constantly in competition with who I was yesterday, or who I was 2 hours ago, or who I was a year ago. Not anyone else. I am nemesis, as in I am the only person who I am competing against. And that is my benchmark. And this is a very powerful way to see yourself in terms of personal value, because in our education system, where we're being taught to compare ourselves to one another, where our parents sometimes unintentionally ask us why we aren't doing as well as a friend or a peer or someone who they read on a really great newspaper, you have to think back to that statement of I am nemesis, as in you are the only person who you are in competition with. When you look in the mirror every morning, that is the person that you are trying to be. That is the person who you are trying to empower and strengthen to become the person that you want to be. And that comes from reflection. It's not just I am nemesis, it's I am empowered, I am fortunate, I am grateful, I am invested, I am interested, I am listening. Those are some key phrases that you can use to ultimately navigate what personal value means to you, and also how your personal value affects the people you interact with in your community. One of the biggest things I also like to say with personal value is understanding that your progress isn't linear. Success is never, ever, ever going to be linear. If it was, it would be boring, and the story would just be the same script over and over and over again. We live on suspense, we live on mystery, we live on the serendipity of life. And so just remember that you didn't come all this way when you make all this progress just to settle in one position or to be set back by a failure. Instead, you should use that to see, okay, this is a point in my life where it's not going exactly as planned, but how far am I from where I was a year ago? How far am I from where I was last week? How far am I from who I thought I was going to be? These are the questions that will ultimately empower you when you feel, stuck in the failure, because there's a way out of it, and it's remembering and reflecting on the progress that you've already made and the access that you've already created. This is also a really, really powerful image, and I'm just going to move my cursor off to the side here. And I love this picture because, one, if you notice, there's also a light bulb in my background. I really, really like light bulbs and what they represent. But on my cover specifically, I have an exploding light bulb. And that was just to demonstrate, how a light bulb is usually shown as an innovation technique, but it's something that was created in the 1800s and we're still using it. And similarly, in innovation, we use this light bulb to demonstrate what it means to have an idea or to be inspired by something. And that's exactly what this is happening in this photo. This person is pulling out the plug of their own light bulb, and that is just an image of self-sabotage, or in more particular terms, I guess, to how we are now, imposter syndrome. And the reason why I had to pause for a second is because there's so many different names for it. You can use self-sabotage, you can use imposter syndrome, you can use just not feeling motivated, you can use the dog days of summer as a reason. And honestly, when it comes down to imposter syndrome specifically, pulling out this plug can be detrimental to creating your own access, because you start to look at where you are. So you take that quote that I just showed you, that you didn't come this far just to come this far, and you start saying to yourself, do I really deserve to be this far? And I feel like there needs to be a clarification, or like just a point where you pause and you think to yourself, I do deserve to be where I'm at. I have worked hard to get to where I'm at, and me pulling on the plug of my innovation cycle, me pulling on the plug of my ideation process, me pulling on the plug of my progress in general is only detrimental. And seeing yourself as an imposter, it continues to affect your relationships and how you interact with the projects that you're interested in. That being said, your mind is so incredibly powerful. I'm going to tell you a really, really great statistic about thoughts at the end of the presentation that blew my mind, honestly, when I was doing research for my book. But just keep in mind that your mind ultimately stimulates all of the activities that you do, all the interactions that you have, all the relationships that you build, and all of the ongoing tasks, that you have in your mind. And so you want to make sure that you're enriching your mind and really feeding your mind with words and positive affirmations that will stimulate the way that you interact with what you're interested in and how you create your own access, as well as the relationships that you surround yourself with in the community that ultimately will support you because of the way you think. Let me move this back to the side here. So back to the idea of self-sabotage, it's different from imposter syndrome in that it is an active conviction almost of telling yourself, I can't do this, I'm out of my league, and that eventually leads to action. And so that's the detriment, and that's why I also emphasize the importance of knowing that your mind is so powerful, because if this is something that you're constantly thinking of, that imposter syndrome is just going to bubble up, turn into self-sabotage to the point where you are pulling the plug on what you're interested in, and you're shutting down, you're not wanting to focus, you're just spending that time doing things that you're not supposed to, whether that's procrastination or just, tearing down someone else's innovation cycle, which is also detrimental. And it's just making your pursuits and projects seem like they're way too out of your league for you to even pursue. So one of the stories that I shared in the book that I love really resonated with me when I interviewed this person. His name is Andrew Yu, and he is now a rising sophomore at the University of Pennsylvania. And he told me about how he really got into entrepreneurship when he was a high schooler, and when he was a freshman, he went to the DECA conference, and it was just a conference for youth entrepreneurs where you could learn about a whole bunch of really cool projects and youth building great businesses to solve problems. I usually say solving mundane problems with innovative solutions. That's what they were doing. And so he was in this space where there were tons of entrepreneurs really working at their craft, doing their thing, and they were high schoolers, just like him. And in that moment, of this first exposure, he said to himself, I didn't know that this was even in my reach of ability. I didn't even know that this was a kind of expertise that high schoolers could reach. I didn't know that I could create this kind of access for myself. And so for him, that story is really remarkable because he identified and was able to find an area where there was real interest being put towards this different way of thinking, and then it was actually being done. The actions were being carried out. People were trying to create solutions for different problems that existed and working together to do that as a collective effort. And that's something very important to mention because entrepreneurship, innovation, education, none of these systems can really be disrupted unless we are working together to create access, not just for ourselves, but also for others. And in recognizing these tendencies, it will actually help you as you continue to go through life, whether that is in your school virtually, or when you're working with your family members, or, working on your own side project or working on your main projects. This is something that you're going to continue to think about, that I need to create the environment that will help me create the access that I need, not just for myself, but also for those around me. All right. And then the third thing with personal value is ultimately understanding how to unlearn perfection. I know that in the education system, one of the most common messages is you have to be perfect. You have to get this great SAT score to get in the best college in the entire world. You have to be a nonstop, non-sleep machine and just get everything done, be well-rounded, be the perfect person in the entire world. And it's unproductive. Why? Because we are teaching students to reach this unattainable goal of perfection. And even if they do reach it, the rewards do not outweigh the benefits of actually focusing on what you're interested in, what you're passionate in. And it teaches them that if I just reach this height, if I just, check these boxes. James Massicow in the book, in chapter 3, he also talked about this in terms of checking boxes, setting your floor, raising the ceiling and whatnot. If you're just going through life checking boxes for perfection, it's not going to be productive and you're not going to be creating access. Instead, you're just following in this pathway that has been set before you by others, whether that's your parents or your teachers telling you that these are goals that you need to reach. And there's nothing wrong with getting great grades, but that can't be the only goal that we have as students, because like I said, when you leave the education system, you're not being graded with these numbers anymore. Instead, it's on your soft skills, your personal skills, like how well are you at problem solving? How well are you at really getting information across? Can you take on responsibility? Can you show leadership? Can you listen? Can you compassionately listen? And so these are the values that you really ultimately want to have when you think about personal value. And it starts with unlearning that mindset of perfection. One of my most favorite parts in the book, as you can see on the slide, page 139 rather. I'm pretty sure this is chapter 10. Yes, chapter 10, serious inquiries only. Serious inquiries only, the debate on career readiness and representation. I talk about moonshot thinking. And in this chapter, I really emphasize the importance of mindset thinking. And that's just, let me give you a really practical example. So let's say that it takes me 40 minutes. It actually does take me like 40 minutes to an hour to get from Delaware to Pennsylvania. That's where I'll be going to school in the fall. And moonshot thinking is being uncomfortable with the idea that I can't say, I'm going to go to Delaware and then go to Japan in the same amount of time. Moonshot thinking is being uncomfortable with the fact that I can't go from Delaware to Japan in 20 minutes and thinking, why can't we? What are the steps that we need to take to do that? And because this is such a phenomenon in the 60s, specifically because President Kennedy, he said, we're going to go to the moon. We don't know how, but we're going to get there. And so to the people, they thought, if we just say we're going to go to the moon without, we have the action steps, we don't know if it's really possible, but if we actually do this thing, what can't we do? And so that was one of the biggest examples that I always use in my education, because if you can visualize what you want, it's just a matter of figuring out the action steps to create the access and to create that goal that you are striving for. So let's do it. I'm super excited for this. We are going to create our own moonshots. And as an entrepreneur, as a social entrepreneur, one of the biggest goals that I have is to be on the Forbes 30 under 30 list. I'm 18 now, so I have plenty of time. It's still just a goal that I have. And so this exercise is really focused on that. If you are more creative, or if you want to go into a more specific version of this, because there's different magazines. You can do Essence, you can do Vogue, you can do Cosmopolitan. I probably butchered that, but you can do any of the magazine covers that you want. I specifically chose Forbes because that is the goal that I wanted to reach. And in terms of education, I always think that students should strive to have problem-solving mindsets, and entrepreneurs are problem solvers, engineers are problem solvers, students are problem solvers. This is something that we can all do. And so this is inspired by my older sister, and I have 4 siblings, fun fact. 3 sisters, yes, there's 3 of them. 3 sisters and 1 brother. And my older sister, she is 20 years old, and in her dorm room for freshman year, she had pictures of like Serena Williams and Oprah on her wall. And she was sending me pictures of it, that's why I was inspired by it. But I did this activity in March, and I thought to myself, this is so cool. Like, I want to have a poster of myself on this cover. I want to visualize, I want to create a moonshot thought of myself on this cover. And that's exactly what I did. And so this person right here is my mother. She's so incredibly supportive, and I wanted to make this cover for her to demonstrate the idea that creating access doesn't just mean visualizing something for yourself. It's also visualizing something for someone else. It's also visualizing things for others, for visualizing things for your community. And so for me, I was just like, this is somebody who is ultimately the foundation for what community means to me and what opportunity means to me. And so I created this cover. She loved it. She ended up putting it on her phone, on her laptop, on her iPod, all of her devices. And this is something that you can do as well. So if you create a cover for yourself, make sure to also reach out and create one for one of your friends, or share the cover template with them so you can just help them in this manifestation activity. I made one for myself, side by side. You want to choose a photo where you're looking at the camera, you're really close. Not one where you're looking off into the distance, because that's not usually the style of this kind of magazine. And the reason being is it's literally a picture of yourself staring at you, looking back at you, wanting this dream to come alive. And you also wanted to put it somewhere where you'll see it frequently throughout the day. And so make sure you're specific with the kind of photo that you choose, that it's something that is close up, that has good lighting, that kind of looks like a magazine. You don't have to be a professional photographer or anything like that. That's not what this conference is about. But any photo that you can use that is as close as possible and clear as possible, that is motivating and appealing to you, would be ideal. And so how do I create this, Deborah? How do I do this? What you're going to want to do is type in this bit.ly link, 39 capital R lowercase p 7YQ, and you're going to click on it, but you have to create a Canva account first. Canva is free to use. You just need to have a Gmail account, or if you don't have a Gmail account, there's a couple of other ways you can create one, but it's free to use. And so once you create your account, then you click the link. You don't want to do this backwards, because it'll just show up as a preview if you don't have an account. So create the account and then click on the link, and it will take you here. My laptop is loading. It's going to take you right here. And if you hit this little pencil at the bottom and you hit use template, it will create a copy of the copy. So it should say at the top of your document, copy of make a copy. That's exactly the goal that we're aiming for. And so after you click on that, you'll be able to go back in, make the edits, and you're going to click on use template, just like I showed you. Make sure that you don't hit the edit button because this is an international conference, which means that everyone's going to have access to this link. And if you click edit and you edit it and move things around, then it's not going to be the same template for everyone. So I'm urging you right now, make sure that you hit use template so that you can make a copy of it and go on your merry way. I want to see your covers, so you can send them to me at my email, deborahowrites@gmail.com. That's the cover that I just imagined of you, your smiling faces on that, because it's something that really can happen. You just have to visualize it. You, of course, do the action steps, but creating the moonshot is the most important part. And so when you're done creating it, send it to me, share it with your friends and family members, make it your background. This is actually my background on my phone. And if I could clear everything, I could show you. You see that? It's the same thing. I have it as my phone background, and it's very motivating because it's something that I see every single day. So that's the other thing. You want to create this this poster, you want to put the effort into it, and then you want it to be something that you see every day so that the effort is paying off and you're manifesting it. The next thing that we're going to talk about in terms of creating your own access is identifying your resources. It is so incredibly important for you to understand what it means to have a resource and what opportunity means, so that when you're in this active pursuit of creating your own access, you have the tools that you need to go about doing so. And so for me, access to me means opportunity to me means experiences, speaking events, programs. So speaking events like these are conferences, programs, communities, scholarships, connections, and personal projects that create a meaningful bridge between who I am, so who Deborah is right now, and who I am becoming, so who Deborah is becoming. And I even talk about myself in third person in this part of my book with the story of Morgan Klug, a student from Wisconsin, where she was able to do an apprenticeship and really understand, whether or not banking was a career for her. But in that story, I talk about why it's important to understand your shock value, and this is kind of in tune to that. And so with who you are and who you are becoming, there are opportunities that you can apply for and that you can immerse yourself in to really get closer to that definition of who you want to be. And usually I would love to do this definition with you guys to come up with a combined version of this. And so if you can send an email to me about what you think your definition of opportunity is, I can create like a big definition of everyone's responses and make it into one so we can have our definition for the Inspired Conference. And so once you have your list of resources, you want to keep going. You want to put it in a Google Doc, you want to write it down somewhere, you want to do spreadsheets or whatever form of categorizing you want to do. You can do Notion. There's so many different apps now that you can use. And so you want to create a list of resources. One you can definitely say is, now you have me, you're at the speaking conference. You have all of these incredible resources that you're going to be immersed in all week. So not just me, but all of the speakers from this week. And you can continue to reference this list. You can use the contact information. You can follow up on our activity and really understand how are these people who inspire you continuing to create your own access, and how can you create your own access through the opportunities that we share with you. So this is usually the part of the webinar where I take a couple minutes of a break, but since it's not live, since it's pre-recorded, I'm just going to tell you, tap into your network, see where that access is, whether that's your friends from sports, from different clubs, from different organizations, your family members, your professors, administrators, leaders from your place of worship, the internet, meaning social media platforms like LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat. There's so many others that I didn't even have the chance to name, but they're out there because there's so many incredible, rich connections that are waiting for you. And all you have to do is, create this list. You don't have to do it all at once, all in one sitting. It can be a continuous and ongoing document so you don't feel overwhelmed, and reach out to these people and, add them to your circle of community. When you're tapping into your network, a question that I got when I was doing this exercise with another group was, well, how do I know who to put into my network? And these are the questions that you need to ask yourself. When you see a person on there, let's say that their name is Thompson. Let's say his name is Thompson, or her name is Tamara. Let's use Tamara. I like Tamara. Let's say her name is Tamara, and she is a dancer. She also does pottery. You want to ask yourself, is Tamara someone I can go to for guidance? Is Tamara someone who's a part of my target audience? Am I somebody who is interested in movement or performance? And is that something that is currently a part of my brand? Do I know stuff about pottery? How can I use pottery to connect my audience to something that I talk about? How can I just empower my friend Tamara, who is, working on her craft, being this artist who's not just an incredible dancer, but also makes some really sick plates and cups? So you want to ask yourself, is this a person who is pursuing an interesting project that you can learn from? Is this somebody who is learning a new idea that you've never even heard of? Does this person have a creative mindset as opposed to a consuming mindset? Are they actively putting out questions into their community? Are they actively learning and sharing what they have learned? These are the people that you really want to add to your network. And then it goes two ways. You don't just ask this person for guidance. You also want to be a source of advice and information as well. I'm not saying that you have to know everything, but you also have unique experiences that you can speak to that can definitely help someone else. So now I'm going to give you a little freebie. This is from my book. This is actually the last chapter, chapter 18, why you should have a mentor and where to find one. And in this chapter, I interview my twin sister. We're actually identical. And it has been such an incredible experience as an identical twin going through the education system. And I share a couple of stories with how I've navigated being a twin and experiencing that. But I knew that I had an interview for it. So this was something that came out of that interview. We came up with something called the circle of community. And I'm only going to share two fingers today, the pinky and the thumb. You can get the rest of the details in that chapter. But one of the biggest ones is your pinky. I had a guidance counselor in high school that was given to me by the school based on alphabetical order. And I absolutely loved my guidance counselor. She was so supportive and so understanding. She was always a person that I could go to, regardless of whether I was struggling or regardless of whether it was a day of true joy. And she just connected me with resources in ways that I couldn't even imagine. And she ultimately was the embodiment of somebody who invested in my future and really saw me as somebody. She saw who I was becoming rather than who I was. And that was something that really motivated and spurred me to take action in creating my own access to eventually help show her more resources that I could give to students who she was helping with. And it was just this continuous cycle of creating access for one person and creating access for yourself and just creating access in your community as a whole. The second thing that I'm going to share with you is the thumb. So your thumb is actually not a person. It's your journal or just a place where you can write down your thoughts. I talked about this a little bit in the beginning, how your mind is a very powerful thing. Did you know that you have 60,000 to 80,000 thoughts a day? When I read that statistic for the first time, I was absolutely awestruck. I couldn't believe it, because that means that you have 2,500 to 3,300 thoughts per hour. So in just 1 hour of you listening to the Inspired Conference, you have had over 2,000 thoughts. Isn't that incredible? Isn't that just so remarkable? And so you want to have a place for those thoughts to go. And for me, it is my notebook. I left it upstairs, but I have one. It has stickers on it. I've made it really fun. And I'm transitioning to a new notebook for college because it's almost like a bullet journal in a way, but you just want to find a notebook that is functional for you, whether that's something that's digital. I also have a digital one where I share about my day, almost like in a letter writing format. So I also do that. And then one where I just write down my thoughts, write down inspirational comments that I've heard throughout the day, inspirational conversations, things that I want to follow up on. It's just a place where your mind can just exist, and it doesn't have to be anything too serious. We have gotten to the end of the webinar, and I'm sad to say goodbye, but I hope that you have learned a bunch of great insights and lessons from this on how to create your own access. Here's just a brief recap of what we went over in case you want to go back, because I know that this is and will be available up until August of 2021. So you have plenty of time to continue to add these skills to your life and to continue to go back to this and see what ways you can continue to work through creating your own access. And so we talked about personal value with moonshot thinking, not wanting to sabotage your progress or the progress of others, creating that amazing magazine cover that I hope that you'll email to me. Again, my email is deborahowrites@gmail.com. Identifying your resources. I am a resource to you now. The speakers from this conference are a resource to you now. People in your network that already exist are resources to you now. And it's just a matter of reaching out to them, establishing those connections, and then also creating a list. So it's a great place for you to refer to when you go on that path of creating your own access. And then tapping into your network. That was a sneak peek that I gave you from the book, and you can learn more from from it. And there's actually a special that's coming right up, but you want to tap into your network once you make that list. So it's not just something that you did, it's something that you're continuously doing. You want to get into the practice of doing things and having the action that goes beyond it. And it's an ongoing, source and an ongoing resource that you can use to create your access. So if you have any questions, any insights that you learned from the conference, not just from my session or not just from day one, the future of schools, but from all of the days of this conference, feel free to email them to me. I'm going to be following one all week, so I would love to hear about what you've learned and any of the great things any and all of the great things that you have learned from this session. Any questions that you have, feel free to send them to me at deborahowrites@gmail.com. So this is the special that I wanted to share with you. I kind of teased this a little bit. If I could move this off to the side, there we go. So for this week only, my book is actually going to be discounted on Amazon. So this is specifically where you can get it. You can get the paperback for $10 US and the ebook for 99 US cents. And so this is a major discount in my opinion, because I usually retail the book at $15 and now it's $9.99 and 99 cents for the ebook. And you can share your review of the book when you're done reading it. You can share the paperback if you have any book exchanging clubs. I know people are doing that during quarantine and that's become really popular. You can just continue to share the knowledge, and you can even gift it to someone for back to school season as they're gearing up to get ready for a really exceptional school year. So for this week only, discounted price, you can get it from Amazon, and you can go to the link in my website. It'll lead you right there. That is it. We have reached the end of the webinar. I had so much fun speaking with you. This is my social media. These are some of the places where you can contact me. Like I've been saying throughout the video, my email is deborahowrites@gmail.com. I would love to hear from you. I would love to hear your stories of education reform, how you've navigated your country's education system, how you were disrupting it, some things that you learned from this webinar, things that you learned from this week, any questions that you had before listening to the future of schools, and more questions that you now have about the future of schools. You can connect with me on Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. I would love to hear from you. And of course, you can buy my book, Unleashing Your Innovative Genius, High School Redesigned, on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and my website. If you want to get that special discount, you got to go to Amazon. And with that, we have reached the end of the session. I had so much fun sharing with you, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of the conference. Have a great day.
So Deborah, one of the things that I've read from the start of your book, if I may just quote, you mentioned the need for more innovation, more collaboration, more conversation, more inclusion. And you asked the question, is this what we're doing in today's school environment? And then you point out that the time to find this spark in one's journey in life tends to be during this phase of K-12 education. But clearly, many people have not been able to achieve this. Many people credit this spark in their life to other periods subsequent to the K-12 education system. So the question is, what are your thoughts on this? Has the K-12, has your K-12 experience inspired you? And what was the one episode or multiple episodes that you feel may have significantly empowered you from this experience?
So I think the key pieces of the 4 words that I mentioned in my book of having those things that are missing from education is also included in the definition of experiential learning. And so for me, the places that I've been able to find a spark are really just a connection to what I'm learning and being excited about it. That's how I see the spark, has been through these experiential learning experiences, such as a college course that was on healthcare theater, where I really got to combine my interest for healthcare and theater to become a patient, to put myself in the shoes of someone who was being treated, whether that was for appendicitis or an appendectomy for surgery, for a psychological evaluation. I even got to see some childbirth simulations, and those were all things that I never would have gotten from my traditional education experience. A lot of the key experiences that I link to how I've been able to navigate what I'm interested in now, and how those interests continue to change, are where I get to have a hands-on experience and really get to direct the way that I interact with my education. I've also gotten the chance to see this in action, not just with myself, but with other students. I work for a education nonprofit based in New York called GripTape, and at GripTape we give students $500 grants to completely design the way they learn, and it's just so transformative to see challengers come in, and these are 15 to 19-year-olds who are based in the United States as of right now. We see them from the beginning of their challenges all the way until 10 weeks after, and it's almost as if they're entirely new people because they have this awakened sense of agency, they have a newfound determination to go after what they're truly interested in, and they have this great community around them that has shown them that you have potential and we are investing in you so that you can use that potential to your greatest extent, and then also to continue to impact the community that invested in you.
That sounds wonderful, and I think, as you mentioned, experiential learning. I think that that's something that's definitely on the upward trend. If we look at educational reform, even in the edtech industry, a lot of focus is going towards that area, and it sounds wonderful, the experiences that you have been able to go through, which I think most importantly prepares one with the skills that may not necessarily come from the national curriculum, or going through textbooks and all these exams that one does rote memorization for.
Exactly.
So if I may then take your experience and take another question from your book, what does school mean to you?
I've been able to navigate this definition and use the words kind of interchangeably between school and education. To me, school is the building. It's not the place that comes home with me, but rather my education is something that is a lifelong endeavor that I continue to pour into, whether that's through enriching conversations, whether they be difficult, uncomfortable, or comfortable, watching TED Talks, listening to podcasts, watching documentaries, hearing other interviews from people I look up to like Trevor Noah and Lupita Nyong'o. And so I guess I would flip the question and kind of say, what does education mean to me? Because that was the question that I ended up asking myself at the onset of my sophomore year, that eventually led me to not only write this book, but also to have a conversation with students when I did my very first keynote. And for me, I think education is an experience where I'm allowed to direct it. It's focused on my interests, and it's also focused on my growth and development. It also doesn't see the failures that I go through as things that are mistakes or accidents or something that I should be ashamed of, but it instead encourages me to see those failures as things that I can learn from and continue to enrich my community members with, because they happen to all of us. I think the best learning experiences are one where you have your victories, your successes, and your failures, because once you become comfortable with the idea and the fact that failure is just part of the process, you let yourself go. You kind of become so much more comfortable with taking the risks that come with pursuing an education that is designed by yourself, and then also seeing yourself as someone who can do this work, who can completely shape the way that you want to interpret the world, while including those different perspectives that ultimately create the person that you want to become.
I think that's so true, and you mentioned that school is just a building, and I think that that's kind of the direction that education is also going towards. I mean, first of all, the recent pandemic has forced education systems worldwide to take a look at remote learning. But I think even beyond that, and even before that, in countries like Finland, they're already looking at things like learning domes. We already have all these MOOCs that are online. So I guess maybe we could say education is a body of people, and what learning each individual chooses to go through, rather than this very traditional, regimented, structured process. This factory process that puts us into cans and labels us.
Exactly. I think that's a perfect way of viewing it. And I love that you bring up Finland, because they're always making me smile in terms of education progress and reform. And I think just 2 months ago, they announced that they're getting rid of all of their subjects, and they're moving towards something called performance-based learning, where they're going to allow students to actually pursue their interests and use teachers as guides in the classrooms as opposed to just instructors. And so that will help them in terms of becoming more flexible with their students and being able to meet the different needs of the classroom, and then also hopefully help students become so much more awakened to the idea of learning and pursuing that on their own terms.
Definitely. If I may now quote, as we move to the second part, if I may now quote another section from your book, and this is the statements which relate most closely to the title of your session. So why you should create your own access. So according to you, access means acknowledging barriers and creating the solutions to run through them. Your access is how you choose to see beyond your plights, whether as a student, teacher, etc., and to work past them to generate success. And as part of this creation of access, you mentioned networking and perspective as key towards creating your own path. So could you elaborate on this, and how did you personalize your own experience?
Yeah, so for me, this chapter was incredibly important to include in the book because access looks different for every single person because we all have different social economic backgrounds that are very different that ultimately contribute to our education experiences. And in writing this chapter, I realized the unfortunate reality that your zip code very much determines the quality of your education. And so in a traditional education system that tells you that this is the extent of learning that you're going to get based on where your family happens to live, you have to think for yourself, well, how am I going to supplement this experience? How am I going to push back against a system that tells me that this is the only thing I can learn? And for me, that looks like I live half an hour away from the school that I go to, and I was able to choice into the high school that I ended up graduating from. And not every student has that opportunity. And so creating access really means finding the resources that are currently in your network. And if they don't exist, it means expanding that network. Maybe that's through a peer that lives at a school 30 minutes away, or from somebody who lives an hour away, or even somebody who lives internationally. Maybe they live in Australia or Canada or the UK or even Malaysia, So it means continuing to expand that network to get the resources that don't exist in your current one, and realizing that the place that you are in, regardless of the situation, there is a way to kind of supplement that experience. And I think one of the biggest pieces of contention that come along with this access definition is that some people think that it erases what it means to be in an environment that has gone through redlining or the gentrification of Black communities because of the white neighborhoods moving in, ultimately lessening the quality of the schooling there. But ultimately, the way that I see this is an access that everyone is accountable for. So you're creating your own access in education, whether that's getting the resources, expanding your network, but you're also helping to create access for others because you realize that it's not an equitable system. And if we work together, we can not only change our own definition of access, but also community access so that everyone can get the education experience that they deserve.
I think that's so true. And this ties to some of the skills that are perhaps lacking. I mean, I don't wish to generalize here, but the Gen Ys and Gen Zs are called the snowflakes and the strawberries generations. And there's a great need for skills like grit and resilience and a growth mindset in order to avoid a defeatist attitude. And I think a lot of that comes from a strong network of people who will bring that positivity and will bring in that support. And if we look at networking, I mean, yes, within the K-12 education system, we make friends with people, but there isn't this general mindset of networking in terms of developing skills, increasing knowledge. And I mean, I look back at my own personal experience. I mean, I didn't get on LinkedIn till 3 years into my career. So that's something which I think is very important for those who are still in the schooling system.
For sure, and I'm glad that you brought up LinkedIn because it's such an incredible tool. I use LinkedIn to find a lot of the people that I ended up interviewing for my book, as well as the mentor who helped me draft my first keynote, who walked me through some of the ideas that I had for my first TED Talk. And so I definitely agree. LinkedIn is an incredible resource, no matter how late in the game you think you start. As long as you're starting, putting yourself out there and being open to making new connections, there's only so much good that can come out of that platform.
Right, and if I may now go to the next question, you use the phrase in your book, true learning, and the fact that you are able to recognize and achieve self-discovery from this true learning. how did you overcome the pressure for, if I may use the word, perfection? I mean, within the K-12 education system and even beyond, I mean, if we look at, job applications, university applications, and so on, there are a lot of check boxes that have to be ticked, blanks that have to be filled in. Even if we bring it all the way down to, pre-K, kids are being taught to color within lines, and they must use the right colors. The sky must be blue; it cannot be green. So what do you think of these practices and the need for change within them?
So, in terms of my own self discovery, I was able to, I guess, combat the comparative mindset that has been ingrained in students from the very beginning, even from when we're kids, that we have to get perfect grades, that we have to be the best student in the class. I realized that I wasn't learning when I was just staying to this perfectionist ideology. And I also wasn't allowing myself to be immersed in new experiences that I'd never gone through before. I remember when I was a sophomore, because I went to the number one school in my state, in the state of Delaware. And so everyone was coming in from all these really beneficial middle schools. And my middle school wasn't the very best middle school in the entire district, but I still was able to get a lot from it. And I just realized in that moment, just looking at my grades and looking at the environment that I was in, that striving to be valedictorian was not a feasible goal, and it wasn't an ideal goal for myself. And I realized that if I truly wanted to benefit from being in this environment with people who were like-minded, with people who wanted to achieve, I needed to completely reorient my approach. And for me, it meant not being so focused on the grades that I was getting, but rather the conversations that I was having, the real insights that I was deriving from the books that we were reading, and then also the connections that I was making between my peers. And so for me, my self-discovery completely changed from what was expected of me from years past, from people telling me, you have to be perfect, you have to be the valedictorian, you have to be the star of the class. And I realized that that's not what I wanted at all for myself. And so when I was able to make that realization, my self-discovery journey really took off, because I realized that I didn't have to have all of this pressure on myself, not just from external people or just society in general. I didn't need to be this perfectionist that my education system told me that I had to be in order to be successful. And that just allowed me to have this space to explore as many interests as I wanted to, and then to hone in on the things that I really cared about. In terms of creating an environment where students can do this, I think that it's important for teachers and parents to emphasize that your education isn't just about your grades. It's not about getting into the best university. It's not about getting the very best job. It's about understanding how to get the core skills and values that you're going to use as a citizen in this community. And so for me, I realized that we weren't talking about public speaking. We weren't talking about the art of storytelling. We weren't even talking about personal finance and how learning about money can help people in terms of investing in others, investing in their own potential, and then giving back to the community. And these were all skills that we desperately needed to have. And so I thought to myself that I need to come up with a value statement. And fortunately, that's what my mentor was a real champion in. That's what his work is. He helps people find their one word that ultimately helps guide them through the endeavors that they go into. And for me, that word was an igniter. And that just means that I see myself as an unstoppable creator who works together with different communities to unite them, to help them to collaborate together, and ultimately empower them to work towards igniting agency in themselves and their communities. And by having this definition and having this core value that I now orient my entire life around, I feel like I have so much more purpose, and I'm able to, go towards things that I care about with such tenacity that I wouldn't have had in the past. And so I think the future of education, the future of schools really, and that's what this session is about, is moving towards an education where students are comfortable in taking the steps necessary to find their purpose and their identity, and lose that external pressure that they have to be perfect, because trust me, you don't have to.
I fully agree. I think if we look at the numerous angles that pressure can come from, parental pressure, peer pressure, societal pressure, financial pressure. I mean, all these will result in people thinking, I must get my A's or my 4.0 CGPA, and then I'll get a scholarship, and then I'll get into a good university, and then I'll get into a good job. But I think a lot of people will also end up at a point where they end up in a very decent job, and then start realizing, what is my mission in life, and how can I contribute to others around me, or to others around the world. And I think it's also something which is close to my heart. I had a thought, around 3 years ago, and asked the question. I did well through my K-12 education system. I did well through university, and then I look at all these other people who have accomplished so much in their lives, and then I ask the question, where did it sort of go wrong? And then I realized it's because of a lack of maybe what people call design thinking nowadays, but it's thinking about how you can help solve other people's problems. I think even if we look at advances like Uber, for example, how these products or services have grown tremendously is because they help people solve these small problems in lives.
Yes, and I think that problem solving is just another one of those skills that the education system, particularly in America, is missing. And I love that you bring up the topic of creating solutions that help solve problems in other people's lives, because we often have the discussion around what we want to be when we grow up. And that's often the questions that educators, parents, teachers are asking us, when the real question should be, what pathways interest you? Like not the pathways, but what about those pathways? What people inspire you? What are the core values and core skills that you want to take away or give into a community that don't exist? And I kind of encourage people in the book, because I ended up interviewing a D1 athlete that was so focused on sports. She thought that her entire life was in soccer, but then she went through a series of surgeries that, I don't want to spoil the story because it's really, really great, but she went through a series of situations where she had to take the time to really evaluate, what is the core purpose that I want to give to people, and how will I be someone who impacts my community? And that kind of sent her in this direction of having an engineer mindset. And to me, I'm obsessed with engineers because I love how they think. They always think towards the idea of, how can I make life better for someone else? How can I create a solution for a problem that currently exists? And I think that that's the kind of mindset that every single student needs to have, because once you identify a problem and you realize that there's so many solutions that you can work through, you get into the heart of what learning is all about. And that's just diving headfirst into the unlimited possibilities of solutions and discovering which ones work best for you and your community.
And yes, and again, this ties back to one of the other things that you mentioned in your book, which is this practice of rote learning, and going back to what we were saying earlier, these regimented structures that sort of put, learning and in a sense put our brains into a box. And that is something that should definitely change. But I think what's more important as well, and again, I quote from your book, you should never measure your success by someone else's ruler.
That's a note to self that I actually have taped up on my wall, because it's a reminder that I often have to tell myself as I go throughout my day. Because, fun fact, I'm also an identical twin. And so my entire life, I've been navigating with the idea of comparison that people are always talking about, whether you're scrolling through your social media feed, or you have a neighbor who your parents are always comparing you to. I have a twin sister, and so comparison has become a reality of my everyday life. From every waking second of my existence, I have been compared to someone, and we have both been learning together how to navigate when people say to her, why haven't you written a book? Because writing a book isn't a part of her purpose. It's not a part of her path yet. Maybe she will write a book in her future, but you shouldn't use the fact that I've written a book to justify why she should write a book. Or for her, why aren't you a part of the Board of Education? Because that's what she is in our state. She's a part of the State Board of Education as a student representative. They ask me, why aren't you in that position? Because that's not the position that I needed to occupy. I needed to do this work. I wanted to go through the process of education reform by writing a book, by starting an organization that really focuses on helping students discover what they're interested in. And that's the path that I've decided to take. It doesn't benefit either one of us if we start to see each other through our own accomplishments, and rather we need to see each other through the lens of, how can I help Dorcas? That's her name, Dorcas. How can I help her in her pathway to discovery? How can I help her in her contribution to being an education activist, to being involved in the advocacy work, and her thinking the same way? How can I help Deborah, get her message out to the world? How can I get more people, centered around what it means to unleash your innovative genius and really help to redesign a system that doesn't work? Those are the kinds of mindsets that are going to help us, not seeing yourself as, well, why am I not doing what she's doing? Or why am I not progressing in the same way that that person's doing? Because it's not going to help you, and it's honestly a waste of time. The best thing that I think that I usually derive out of don't measure your progress using someone else's ruler is the fact that my journey may be in inches, her journey may be in meters, and those are parallel lines. They're not the same measurement. And so when you start to see yourself like that, you can choose a measurement. You can say you're in feet, you can say you're in miles. There's so many different metrics in the metric system that you can use. And I know that our metric system in the US is different from everyone else. So you can decide to use what measurement you want. But at the end of the day, you have to realize that your journey is going to look different from someone else's. And that's not a bad thing. That's something that you should continue to learn from and see how you can use your different experiences to build something that ultimately benefits you.
That's so true. And the analogy that came to my mind as you were describing your situation was, if you had, let's say, a bird and the bird had two wings on one side, that's not going to work. So you need both sides to have the wings in order for the bird to be able to soar. And I think that it's great what you and your twin sister are doing. So when we look at the topic of measurements or comparing with others, you emphasize the importance of setting the floor over raising the ceiling. Would you say perhaps that the issue or the stumbling block in most cases is a great ambition, but perhaps lacking in resilience, lacking in the drive to really pull through?
I think that's exactly the way that I would describe one angle of that. And the other one would be in terms of the resources that you have. Like I mentioned before, there are definitely some kids, particularly white affluent Americans, who have a lot more resources going into this. They have the experiential learning experiences already. They go to the private schools that really give them the support, the mentorship that is missing from a lot of the classrooms. And they don't really have to worry about redesigning an experience because the experience was built for them. And so this kind of mindset of setting your floor is really for Black, Indigenous, people of color, students who don't have the same resources. And maybe there is a student who's white, who isn't as affluent as the stereotype may go. And I'm not trying to say that all white people are rich, because that's not true. There are definitely some people who are not in the same social and economic background. And so with this kind of mindset, it's evaluating what resources exist at the surface level, because once you identify what you have, you can determine where are the gaps and where those things need to be filled in. Because just like you said, you can have a great ambition, but you need to have the skills of resilience. Maybe you need to get that really great mentor. Maybe you need to get the funds to fuel your idea to make it a reality. But until you set that floor, it'll just make it seem like that ceiling is a lot higher than it actually is.
Yeah, and I think, as you rightly point out, even let's say in Malaysia here, a very much multiracial country, but even putting race aside, you've got your private and international schools where the affluent are able to afford the fees, and everyone else has to, quote unquote, settle for the public education system. So there is great inequality involved, and a lot of that is due to the lack of financial empowerment. But there is also a thought. I read this from, don't know if you know him, Professor Scott Galloway. One of his recent posts, he mentioned that financial empowerment is slowly decreasing in being a factor of societal divide as compared with the educational attainment. People that are able to go into the best schools and get the best degrees. I mean, we see job applications that are determined based on whether you graduate from an Ivy League university or otherwise. So I think this is something that definitely needs to be addressed. Just because people come from a non-Ivy League university, or just because people do not have a university degree, doesn't mean that they don't have the 21st century skills, the communication skills, being industrious, having honesty and integrity.
Precisely. And I think that it's great that you bring that up too, because I'm about to become an Ivy League student. I'm going to the University of Pennsylvania in the fall. And that's often a conversation that I've started to have with my future classmates, as well as the peers that I have that aren't going to an Ivy League university. And so for us, it means, what will the job market look like, 4 years from now when we have our degrees? How easy will it be for me to matriculate as an Ivy League student versus you as somebody who went to let's say a community college or a public university? And I think that there's more of a societal focus towards identifying what is the value of a college education, and doesn't matter if we have the word Ivy League in front of it, or community college, or state university, or land grant, or research, or liberal arts. And I think that as a community, we're starting to identify what are the flaws in each of these institutions and how to dismantle and kind of unlearn the biases that we have when we hear that someone went to an Ivy League university. Does that mean that they have credibility just because of where they went to? Or when we hear that someone decided to go to a community college instead because that's what was affordable for them, and they still were able to get the skills that they needed to thrive in the job market. And so I think continuously we're having this conversation about what it means to have a college degree and whether or not it's even worth it, and then how to remove the biases that we are automatically trained to have in terms of what kind of college degree you have.
Right. So, Deborah, I asked this question to every speaker that we interview. What are the key takeaway messages that you're able to offer the audience members in terms of, immediately actionable strategies? But I think, let me twist that slightly again, take this question from your book, which I really love. If you have 30 minutes each day to do something which you wanted to do, how would you use that time, or how would you encourage our audience members to use that time?
I would encourage audience members to really take the time to sit down and journal. I think a reflective practice like that will help you in identifying what are the things that you're currently thinking about. We're in the midst of a pandemic, so there's probably a bazillion thoughts going through your mind, as opposed to the average number that we usually have. I don't have the number on top of my head right now, but I'm pretty sure it's in the hundreds or the hundreds of thousands. It's not in the billions, but because of the situation that we're in right now with the pandemic, and it just might feel a little bit overwhelming to exist right now. So I would definitely recommend, if you only have 30 minutes, I would say sit down and journal. And these are kind of the prompts that I would walk you through. What is a current problem that is going on outside of the pandemic that you want to work towards solving? What are the actions that you've already taken that you can replicate or encourage your community members to do? And then what is something that truly brings you joy? What is something that reawakens that creative side of you that honestly just encourages you through this tough time to continue to be someone who's contributing, as opposed to someone who is kind of reversing the effects that we're kind of have by not wearing a mask or just by being ignorant or being racist. What are the actions that you're taking to not only contribute to the community and be a citizen who is focused on the growth of everyone, and how are you navigating the biases that you thought that you had in the past? Like, who are you now who you weren't 3 months ago? How have you changed? How have you evolved as a person? And then what steps do you see in the future, even though it's very uncertain right now? What steps in the future do you want to take towards creating a new normal that actually is equitable and actually works towards meeting the needs of people who have long been disenfranchised and disadvantaged in a system that told them that they weren't good enough? How are you going to help communities like the Black community, like immigrants, like people who have a DACA status, and maybe it's particular to your country? How are you going to help people who have often been seen as less than, and how are you going to empower them in the future?
There we go. It's great that you mentioned reflecting, and it's a big part of our conference. I would like to take this opportunity to tell the audience members, we have the conference app, we have even basic tools like Google Forms where you can reflect on your learning from Deborah's session and also from all the speakers' sessions. And finally, Deborah, how do you see yourself innovating and perhaps provoking mindset shifts in the next 12 months, given that you're now also going to begin your new journey in university?
I think one of the biggest steps that I'm going to take moving forward is continue to advocate for and encourage people to realize that the change has to happen on an individual level. It has to start in a smaller part before it can become something that's national. And particularly for education reform, that looks like creating systems and curriculums that are race-based and actually help people have that reflection like you talked about, and really think about how have my privileges helped me to get where I am right now, and how is the things that I've learned, whose stories are the most important that have been told to me, and what stories am I not listening to? What stories do I need to add to my environment, and what stories need to be amplified a lot more? And then one of the other questions is policy. I think it's important to talk about the different bills and laws that we want to pass, but as community members, we have to work on enforcing them as well. And so maybe that looks like mentoring someone in your community, or, creating a program that enriches high school students, and not seeing yourself as someone who was just in the system 30 years ago, so it doesn't matter to me now. I think it means reframing your mindset in terms of what is your contribution in this space in terms of education, whether you have kids or not, or nieces or nephews, and how you can continue to contribute to the ongoing momentum 12 months from now to create an education system in the wake of the pandemic and everything shifting. How can we really create an education system that equips the needs of the students and also communicates and cultivates their interest so that they're waking up in the morning so excited to go to school and ready to become the innovators of the future.
Thank you, Deborah. And if I may just summarize from what you've just said, it's important for us not to just have a foot through the door. I think we should be banging down that door and stepping right through it and taking the necessary steps. And that takes a lot of leadership. It also takes a lot of grit and resilience, and then also takes a growth mindset. And these are topics that we'll also be covering in our other sessions with other speakers. So that's it. Thank you so much for your time, Deborah. It's been a joy, and always great to have the younger generations with us.
Thank you so much for having me.